take a look at Lesson 2. We're going to talk about some more of the changes during the 1920s. The 1920s was a time of many social changes and economic changes, and industry is thriving across the nation. Industry is talking about factories and businesses. Since many Americans were earning higher wages, they were spending more money. And during this time, if you didn't have money, you could buy things on monthly payments or with like a credit, like the way we know today. Americans also had more leisure time and more money to go out and do fun stuff. During the war, many American farmers had increased their production to help feed the soldiers. But after the war is over, we don't need as much food because we're not sending food overseas to feed the soldiers. And a lot of these farmers were going into debt. They were losing their money, losing their business. So many of them considered moving to the city. America also became more mobile because people were finally able to buy cars. Before this time, cars were basically just for rich people. They were super expensive and they required a bunch of maintenance, but something's going to happen that makes cars more affordable. Radios become popular too, and they're an unlimited source of entertainment for people in their homes. And people are finally starting to be connected by telephone. So, back to the cars. What was the first widely used automobile? The first automobile that became affordable to the regular people was the Ford Model T. When they improved the way that it was produced by using the assembly line, they were able to bring the cost down to $250 for a brand new car. Now, that's quite a bit cheaper than a car is today, even if you compare how much money people make. And money was worth more back then than it is today. But it was cheaper no matter how you look at it. The Model T was made on the assembly line. And an assembly line is a way of making something. You've seen it in cartoons, you've seen it in movies. It's where they have like the conveyor belt, and each person is doing one job over and over and over again. So if you were working on the assembly line, you don't need to know how to build the whole car. All you need to know how to do is do that one thing, like put the steering wheel on or put that tire on, and you're going to do that hundreds of times per day. So every one of these cars at first was exactly alike. There was no options for it. Henry Ford, the guy who owns the Ford Company, made a joke saying that you could have a Model T in any color you want as long as it's black. So what he's saying is they're all black, so that's what you get. The cars are quite a bit different. They had a canvas roof, so they're made out of the same stuff as like those Chuck Taylor shoes. So the roof was made out of fabric. And you had to hand crank the car to start it. So you'd have to be out in front of the car, and you would turn this little crank, and then you'd have to run back in and give it some gas. People found many different ways to use the Model T. Farmers used them to help plow their fields. They also used them to run like machinery. People used to make jokes because the cars were not built great. And when you were driving down these bumpy roads, because the roads weren't paved, sometimes pieces of your car would fall off. You throw it in the trunk, and then you fix it later. So the Ford Model T stayed popular until their next car came out called the Model A. The Model T put the nation on wheels, and it became necessary for pretty much all the American families eventually. And the main reason why is it gives you more choices about where you live and work. Like if I did not have a car, I could not work at the school. I live 40 miles away. I would never make it here if I had to walk. The federal government also encouraged people to fix the roads, build the roads, and more people started moving towards the suburbs. And the suburbs are the areas right outside the city. So by the mid-1920s, most American families had a radio, a telephone, and a phonograph in their home. Silent movies were the main entertainment people would go out to before this time, but the radio was starting to take over because you could keep it in your home and you could listen to these live radio shows every week, and it was basically free other than the electricity. So people started setting up permanent radio stations. One of the first permanent radio stations was KDKA in Pittsburgh. And the radio stations were important because they could give you news almost immediately. You didn't have to wait for a newspaper to be printed and brought to your house or buy it at the store. They could put a story on the news right away. So you could have someone watching the World Series of Baseball giving you the play-by-play. They also could announce important things like the presidential election. In 1869, the National Women's Suffrage Association was formed. So this is back before what we're talking about now. And this was a group of women led by Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Susan B. Anthony, and they wanted to change the Constitution to give women the right to vote, because women still could not vote at this time in America. So they tried to get the Constitution changed, and they were unsuccessful. So over the next 50, 60 years, more and more women joined this fight trying to get the right to vote. In August of 1920, enough of the states agreed, 3/4 of them, and they ratified the 19th Amendment. And the 19th Amendment gave all women the right to vote. So women are also changing a lot during this time with what they want out of life and what they want to do. Many young women of the 1920s got the nickname of flappers because they didn't do the same thing as their parents. They were, free to flap and blow in the wind. And they refused to be tied down. So these women would wear different clothes than their grandparents and their parents would. They would have shorter haircuts, they would wear shorter skirts, and they would wear brighter makeup. So women during this time also didn't want to be housewives as much. They didn't want to be stay-at-home moms. Many of them started to want careers that had previously only been open to men. Another important thing that happens during this time is a new style of music is created, and jazz becomes incredibly popular during the 1920s. Jazz music is different for a couple different reasons. It's more lively than what people were listening to, and it's not written down. A lot of it is improvised. So if you think about a rapper freestyling, making it up off the top of their head, that's the way a lot of jazz music is. The musicians work together, and one or two of them will actually wing it, or they'll make it up as they go. Jazz started off in the South among African American musicians, and it started off as being like a mixture of some of the songs they would sing while they were working and religious songs. By mixing these styles together, they were able to create jazz, which is one of the first American forms of music. So jazz has lots of different forms, just like there's lots of different kind of rap. There's many different kinds of jazz. There's Dixieland, there's big band, there's swing. This guy named Louis Armstrong, he became famous during this time, playing in his small band, and he's a trumpet player. And he was really famous. You've probably seen him or heard him. His voice is really distinct when he would sing. And when he would play the trumpet, his cheeks would get like real big. But he was an excellent musician. As jazz became more popular, some classical composers started picking up and taking some ideas from jazz. Jazz was really important for a couple of reasons. It actually helped make some people become less racist because it was getting these African American musicians the recognition they deserved. But there was also some negative. There was actually white musicians that would paint themselves with black makeup to look black to play jazz. So there is some positive, but there's negatives with it as well. New dances like the Charleston also became popular during this time. And a lot of older Americans, the previous generations, did not like jazz music. They thought jazz music was a bad influence on their kids. So it's crazy to think that the grandparents thought that jazz music, which most of you guys don't like, was a bad influence and going to make their kids into bad people. Some of America's greatest writers produced important books during this time. There's a story called The Great Gatsby by F. Scott Fitzgerald, and it's about a guy who starts off poor but becomes wealthy. And even once he has all the money in the world, it doesn't solve the problems and make him happy. Sinclair Lewis wrote about small town life in America. Ernest Hemingway, in a book called Farewell to Arms, wrote about World War I and the effects it had on the American men. So there's another important time during this period called the Harlem Renaissance. Harlem is an area in New York, and it became famous for many of the black and African American artists and the artwork they were putting out, the music, the poems, the stories they were writing. They finally started to get recognized for their creativity and, the amazing artwork they were putting out. Okay, guys. So what I need you guys to do, open up Google Classroom, and you are going to work on Chapter 24, Lesson 2,